Chapter 46. The document was none other than a share transfer agreement for the Reinhardt Company. It stated the condition of transferring 20 of the shares of the Reinhardt Company. Are you saying you'll transfer the shares? The shares of the Reinhardt Company. The Reinhardt Company was already a profitable and promising company. To transfer 20 of the shares of a company with such future growth potential was no different from giving away millions of gold. Princess Melissa nodded at Zeke's surprised words. Of course, if you give me your assurance, 1/5 of the company will be yours, Sir Zeke. Huh. It was an act that was difficult to understand with the common sense Zeke had in his past life. Even though he had saved her life by giving her the cure, that was already a matter settled with another contract. All Princess Melissa wanted now was assurance. It felt excessive for her to give Zeke shares for that. Your Highness Melissa, I'm still just a student at Valhalla. I don't understand why you're doing this. Honestly, Princess Melissa's actions only increased his vigilance. In his experience, humans never gave anything without expecting something in return. There was always something fishy about deals with excessively large rewards. Princess Melissa looked at Zeke and said, I am a princess, but I am also a merchant. I am making this offer to you, Sir Zeke, because you are clearly worth the investment. Investment value? What kind of value? Because I'm a Knight of Draker. Please don't misunderstand, I'm not looking down on the Drakers, I apologize, but there are many Draker Knights besides yourself, Sir Zeke. At Princess Melissa's words, something flashed through Zeke's mind, the rights to the red flower disease cure. Currently, the red flower disease was continuously spreading in the border area of the Alencia Kingdom. Princess Melissa was someone who helped the people of the kingdom through her charity work. There was no way she would just ignore the red flower disease. Are you saying you'll give me shares and buy the rights to the cure? If the Empire is spreading this disease, the cure could stop their plot, and even if not, it would still be a profitable deal as it could save the people of the Alencia Kingdom. Zeke looked into Princess Melissa's eyes to understand her intentions. Among the countless people he had met in his past life, there was no one like Princess Melissa who would throw herself into danger for the sake of others. No, there was one person, damn it. I was trying not to think about it. The first person who came to mind when he first returned, he remembered that person who stubbornly insisted on walking their own path like a lone wolf in the frozen north, Sir Zeke. Zeke quickly came to his senses. Melissa and that person he knew had similar eyes. He slowly opened his mouth. Do I just need to declare that I'm not on the Empire's side? Princess Melissa nodded. Zeke stood up, then he drew the sword he had placed by his side. Cliff, who was standing behind him, flinched in surprise and tried to intervene, but Princess Melissa stopped him. Zeke raised his sword and declared, I, Zeke Draker, swear on my honor that I have no connection to the Empire. Although his words were brief, they carried great weight. Princess Melissa nodded. Thank you, Sir Zeke. Your honorable oath has once again reaffirmed my faith in my judgment. Melissa immediately signed the transfer agreement, then she handed the contract to Zeke. Zeke looked at the transfer agreement and pondered. Although he felt burdened by the prospect of maintaining a continuous relationship with Princess Melissa, he couldn't easily give up considering the future value of the Reinhardt Company. If it becomes too burdensome, I can just sell it later. Zeke signed the contract and said, I gratefully accept the shares you have given me, however, I would prefer it if my identity remained confidential. Of course, Sir Zeke, don't worry about that. Melissa put her hood back on and said, I have business trips to Atlas at least once a month. Now that you are a director of the Reinhardt Company, I would appreciate it if you could make time for me as much as possible. With her characteristic elegant smile, Melissa left the reception room. Zeke, left alone in the reception room, looked at the seat where Melissa had been sitting and shook his head. Although he was tired from the lengthy conversation, they had both ultimately gained what they needed somehow. Things are going more smoothly than before I returned, but it seems like I have more headaches. Back then, his life was rough but simple. Zeke shook his head and stood up. Swinging his sword was the best way to clear his head when it was complicated. Zeke headed straight for the training room. You have acquired the True Dragon Sword skill. True Dragon Sword skill S rank added to special skills. Achievement mission successful. Reward. Title, Successor of the Sword Saint. Awarded. Reward. Coordinates of the Kronos Kingdom Treasury. Awarded. Reward. 500 karma points awarded. Reward, 2. Random boxes awarded. Finally finished. Zeke had finally mastered the True Dragon Sword skill after 2 long months. He first checked his status window. Intermediate Administrator status window name, Zeke Draker class. Immortal unique title, Blessed by the Ancient Dragon. Heir of Terrakan Draker, Successor of the Sword Saint Authority. Dragon Control Constitution. Divine Body, Poison Immunity System functions. Inventory 100 slots minimap portal movement intermediate quest book skill shortcut slots potion shortcut slots passive. Skills: healing factor steadfast mind defense infinite stamina combat sense special skills gale force technique A rank proficient elemental sword S rank proficient true dragon sword skill S rank beginner active skills. Static electricity C rank proficient flashbang C rank proficient discord C rank proficient. Precise stab E rank expert continuous slash D rank beginner critical strike D rank proficient high speed movement C rank beginner mana reflection A rank beginner area of effect. Buff A rank beginner draconian skills second stage unlocked. Dragon eyes proficient dragon's majesty proficient gluttony proficient dragon's speech locked dragon scales proficient dragon claws proficient karma points possessed. 1095 He was able to recover 500 of the 800 karma points he had lost using the portal to burn down the McCain cartel's warehouses. By the way, the proficiency of the A-rank skills isn't increasing. No matter how much he used mana reflection and area of effect buff during the past 2 months to try and increase their proficiency, they still remained at the beginner level. It seemed that he needed to use them in actual combat to gain experience. Immediately after checking his status window, Zeke quickly opened his inventory to check the coordinates of the Kronos Kingdom treasury, which he was most curious about. An old piece of paper was stored in his inventory. When Zeke selected the paper, a message appeared. The coordinates cannot be read currently. You need to find the seal that can activate the coordinates. The coordinates can be activated by finding and combining the scattered seals. What? Seal? Activate? A map appeared before Zeke's eyes. Approximate locations were marked across the continental map. What is this? 2 places on the central continent, 1 on the southern continent, and 1 in the north. Are you saying the seal is split into 4? As expected, obtaining the kingdom's treasury was no easy task. At the same time, a mission message window appeared. Linked quest mission: find the scattered seals of the Kronos Kingdom and restore them to their original state. No time limit quest mission reward. Title: Heir of the Kronos Kingdom. Heir of the Kronos Kingdom? The reward is only a title. Although the ability to activate the treasury coordinates was quite attractive, if the reward was only a title, there was no need to rush the mission. Since there was no time limit, he could take it slow. I'll finish the urgent tasks first and then slowly look for them. After finishing his check, Zeke stretched and left the training ground, heading up to his room. As soon as he arrived, he noticed a letter on his bed. Seeing that it was tightly sealed, he figured it was from Kay. Zeke broke the seal and checked the contents. Finally, they've taken the bait. The date for his meeting with Don Juan had been set. It was perfect timing. As Valhalla was about to start its vacation period, Zeke immediately got up from his seat. All right, it's time to see those southern continent druggies again. Come on, this way. The port of Ison was always bustling with ships coming in for trade thanks to Callie Draker's efforts. The pirates in the South Sea were gone, clearing the sea routes across the Central Sea, allowing even regular ships to and from the Dorda Republic to operate. Among the ships in the port was one belonging to the rising Reinhardt Company. Zeke, disguised as a sales representative for the Reinhardt Company's Southern Continent branch, concealed his youthful appearance as much as possible and pretended to be an ordinary young man with his black gloves, the symbol of the Draker clan's pureblood awakener. Removed, there was no one on the ship who could connect him to Zeke Draker. It will take about 10 days to arrive, huh? Even if he wanted to use a portal, he couldn't unless he had been to the destination before. Moreover, even if he had been there, travel was impossible unless the portal coordinates were activated. There were many restrictions, but once he went to the southern continent and activated the coordinates, he could travel there anytime, even if it cost a lot of points, so he decided to think positively. It's perfect for creating an alibi. Zeke hummed a tune as he relaxed on one side of the ship. In his past life, he had traveled so much that he often found himself on ships. He intended to reminisce about those days and relax. Just then, someone approached Zeke. Hey kid, move! Sailors approached and roughly unloaded cargo where Zeke was sitting. There was no need to place it there, but they seemed to have done it on purpose, perhaps finding Zeke's leisurely attitude unsightly. Zeke, who was wearing glasses as a disguise, pushed them up and said to the sailor, Hey you, what's your name? The rugged-looking sailor approached Zeke with an incredulous look. You? Are you crazy, you skinny little brat? Do you want to be thrown overboard? Just then, the captain came up on deck. As soon as he spotted Zeke, he rushed over, rubbing his hands together and bowing his head. Oh, Deputy Branch Manager. Why have you come up on deck already when you could be relaxing comfortably? The sailor who was threatening Zeke was startled by the captain's attitude. The deputy branch manager? The branch manager was the person who held all the authority in the trading company, and the deputy branch manager was the position right below the branch manager. It was rare for someone as young as Zeke to hold the position of deputy branch manager. If it did happen, it meant that the person was a relative or bloodline of a high-ranking member of the company. Just in case, he had asked Cliff to elevate his position, but Cliff had gone as far as creating an identity as his nephew and giving him the position of deputy branch manager. Zeke pushed his glasses up and asked again, "So, what's your name?" The sailor's face turned pale, and he bowed his head at a 90-degree angle. I apologize, deputy branch manager. I made a mistake by not recognizing your high position. Zeke patted the sailor's cheek and said, "Let's do well. I'm watching you." "Yes, understood." Zeke chuckled and was guided into a cabin decorated even more luxuriously than the captain's room. He lay down on the soft bed and felt the texture of the smooth blanket. "I have to be on this ship for 10 days, so there's no need to travel uncomfortably." Zeke, who dreamed of becoming the strongest on the continent. He was someone who knew the sweetness of power. Chapter 47. Zeke disembarked and took a deep breath. The scent of the southern continent, which he hadn't smelled in a long time, stirred his past memories. It was shitty. While wandering around dungeons as a porter for adventure parties, he got caught in a fraudulent contract and was sold as a slave in the southern region. Zeke was 17 at the time. While working as a slave on a Soma farm, he was dragged into a mission as a decoy, and strangely, only Zeke survived. After surviving 5 missions, Zeke received formal hitman training. Surprisingly, the hitman job suited Zeke well. This was because there were no particular difficulties if he calmly focused on the mission. Even knights who could use aura would easily lose their lives if they were poisoned while off guard. It was then that Zeke realized that using aura wasn't everything. However, it was different for blue knights who could handle aura blades. No matter how well Zeke erased his presence and approached, the blue knights would sense him like ghosts. Even if he used poison, they could control the aura in their bodies to burn the poison or expel it, but in the end, they're still human. Humans have weaknesses. Zeke learned how to skillfully exploit those weaknesses and assassinate blue knights, eventually solidifying his position as a named hitman in the McCain cartel. It was only natural that Zeke, with such skills, would be favored by Don Juan, the boss of the McCain cartel. As Zeke reminisced about the past while looking around the port after disembarking, someone approached him. "Deputy branch manager, we're ready." It was the guide that the Reinhardt company had prepared in advance. Zeke boarded the carriage the guide had prepared. The carriage headed towards McCain. Currently, the largest cartel in the southern continent was the McCain cartel, led by Don Juan, and the Favela cartel was closely trailing behind them. The Favela cartel was originally a group of pirates from the South Sea, so they had a sea route that could cross the Sea of Death. Although it was highly dangerous, the profits from Soma were higher than the profits from piracy, so they were using their own distribution network to bring Soma to the central continent and sell it. At first, they smuggled and sold McCain cartel's products, but they gradually expanded their scale and eventually became larger than their pirate base. If the Favela cartel had been somewhat satisfied with this, there wouldn't have been any problems, but they coveted the McCain cartel's position. They thought that if they blocked the syndicate's distribution network, McCain would have no means to transport their goods and they would naturally lead the market. They underestimated Don Juan and thought too simply. In his past life, Zeke was in the midst of the war between the McCain and Favela cartels. Zeke led the McCain cartel's sicarios, going in and out of the jungle to destroy the Favela cartel's production camps and take out their key bosses. Eventually, in less than 3 years after the start of the war, the Favela cartel collapsed and the southern region became even more chaotic with competition among minor cartels. On the day of their victory in the war against the Favela cartel, Don Juan adopted Zeke as his foster son and designated him as his official successor, but that evening, Zeke killed Don Juan and all the executives of the McCain cartel. "Deputy branch manager, we've arrived." Zeke, who was reminiscing about the past with his eyes closed in the carriage, opened his eyes at the guide's words. It seemed they had moved from the port of Galpa to a safe house prepared on the outskirts of McCain. "They've done a good job." Perhaps Cliff had put in extra effort as there was a fairly large camp with an attached warehouse. As Zeke entered the camp, he saw a familiar face, Kay. Kay from the syndicate was already waiting inside the camp. Kay had a slightly nervous expression. "Are you nervous?" "Aren't you?" "I'm fine so far." Kay shook her head with an exasperated expression. She said to Zeke, I've made all the other preparations. We'll be heading to Don Juan's mansion soon. Zeke nodded. Today was a gathering to celebrate Don Juan's birthday, and all the bosses of the McCain cartel, as well as the executives of their partner, the syndicate, would be present. Kay was also scheduled to attend the party as a working member. She had to explain the future distribution plan directly to Don Juan. Zeke was attending the party as her assistant. Kay clutched her head. Phew. You know what? They say the McCain cartel uses alligators to deal with traitors. They paralyze them and throw them alive into a swamp with alligators. To be precise, it's not alligators but shark dragons. They look similar to alligators, but they're over 6 meters long and have unimaginable bite force. It's one of Don Juan's twisted hobbies. He always wants to show off that he owns a shark dragon farm. Kay's face turned even paler. If they find out we burned the Soma, I'll be that monster's food too. Zeke shook his head as Kay murmured, No, Kay, you'll be dealt with differently because you're a mage. In the South, there's a superstition that having body parts of mages can ward off curses. Kay's face turned even whiter at those words. Zeke stood up and patted Kay's shoulder. Let's get ready and go. Kay let out a big sigh and stood up. What was done, and there was no turning back. After changing their clothes, Kay and Zeke boarded a carriage together and headed to Don Juan's mansion in the McCain region. As they headed towards Don Juan's mansion, which practically occupied an entire town as his private estate, Zeke felt a renewed sense of emotion. Don Juan's estate, encompassing an entire mountain, was heavily guarded by cartel members from the entrance. Not only the carriage carrying Zeke and Kay, but also cartel bosses from all over the region connected to the McCain cartel, royalty and officials from the Southern Kingdom, foreign politicians, and local influential figures were all gathering there. Kay's jaw dropped at the sheer scale of Don Juan's mansion as they entered. Oh my God, this isn't a mansion, it's a whole castle. Even in the Central Kingdom, there are few places with castles this size. The wealth that the McCain cartel amassed through Soma was beyond imagination. Perhaps, considering only personal assets across the entire continent, it wouldn't be easy to find someone richer than Don Juan. Zeke knew every nook and cranny of this mansion. Having once lived there and been responsible for its security, even after decades, I remember every detail clearly. Kay and Zeke slowly made their way inside the mansion. The banquet hall was the epitome of luxury. As expected in the southern continent, various beastmen could be seen everywhere. The fact that beastmen, who were rarely seen in the central continent, could be easily found in the southern continent created a sense of unfamiliarity. A sheep beastman approached and politely offered Zeke and Kay drinks. Kay picked up a glass of wine to relax. Zeke declined the offer and carefully examined the faces of the people gathered in the banquet hall. Most of them are familiar faces. Information about key figures that he had been forced to memorize during his time as a hitman unfolded once again, transcending time, knowing the future. Zeke also knew exactly who would die and how. Then, Zeke spotted someone and nudged Kay's arm. Do you know who that person is? Kay looked in the direction Zeke was pointing. She nodded. Joaquin Fernandez, also known as El Mencho. I know him as the second-in-command of the McCain cartel. You know well, remember him well. Why El Mencho? Just then, the lighting in the banquet hall changed, lively music started playing, and mana flames of fantastic colors created by mages flew around the hall. Then, the floor in the center of the hall rose, revealing someone. Standing on the platform was a large man with curly hair and a typical southern mustache, Don Juan. As Don Juan raised his hand, the band played cheerful southern music. Don Juan suddenly picked up a voice amplifier and started singing a southern song along with the music. In the sea of death, I saved a dying life, fought fear, and moved forward. If you disobey, your life is forfeit. Oh, refusal there leaves only traces of death, that noble virtue. The guests at the banquet started dancing excitedly to Don Juan's singing and the southern music. Upbeat music, luxurious food, delicious drinks, and spectacular performances. Don Juan spared no expense on the banquet. After a few lively songs, Don Juan finally stopped the band's music and grabbed the voice amplifier again. My brothers, thank you so much for attending this party today. As Don Juan gave his greetings as the host of the party and stepped down from the platform, the band started playing music again. Kay then said to Zeke, I got a message from the executives. It's finally time to meet Don Juan. Zeke followed Kay to the back of the banquet hall. As they entered the conference room, Don Juan, as well as the key bosses of McCain and the executives of the syndicate, were sitting and talking with each other. Zeke discreetly examined the conference room. Not only hitmen, but also notorious outlaws from the border region, knights from the central continent, and runaway rangers from the northern continent were deployed throughout the room. Money is indeed good. If an assassin were to sneak in and reveal their intentions, arrows would fly from all directions and the knight's swords would strike, surely taking their head off in an instant. Just then, the chairman of the syndicate, noticing Kay's entrance, waved to her with a bright smile. "Don Juan, this is Kay, the working member from our side I mentioned." Kay bowed her head and greeted Don Juan. Don Juan puffed on his cigar and scanned Kay's low-cut dress. "Nice to meet you. I heard you were a mage, but I didn't know you were a woman." "It's an honor to meet you, Don Juan." Don Juan kissed Kay's hand and said, "A beautiful mage is more precious than any jewel." As if to start the meeting in earnest now that Kay had arrived, Don Juan looked around the conference room and opened his mouth. "All right, I'm looking forward to hearing what wise words you have to share. Then, let's begin." Kay opened her mouth with a nervous expression. "Don Juan, do you remember the warehouse fire incident a few months ago?" At Kay's words, the expressions of not only Don Juan but also all the cartel bosses hardened. It was that painful of an incident for the McCain cartel. Don Juan stubbed out his cigar in the ashtray and said, "How could I not remember? But why are you bringing that up?" Kay swallowed hard and said, "I know who was behind that incident." Kay's sudden statement surprised not only the cartel bosses but also the syndicate executives. This wasn't what she was supposed to talk about. "Kay, what are you doing?" The chairman gestured to Kay, but she didn't stop. "Don Juan, that incident is related to the favela cartel, and the boss who colluded with them is in this room." One of the bosses listening to Kay's words jumped up from his seat. "What is that crazy bitch babbling about? Drag her out." Just as the cartel members rushed towards Kay to drag her out, Don Juan raised his hand and stopped them. "Can you take responsibility for what you just said?" Kay slowly nodded. Don Juan leaned back in his chair and said, "Tell me, who is the traitor of the McCain cartel?" Everyone's eyes focused on Kay. "That's when it happened." "Ugh." Someone groaned. The sicarios, hitmen, and guards around them instantly turned towards the source of the sound. To their surprise, Zeke was holding a dagger to the neck of El Mencho, the cartel's second-in-command. He looked at Don Juan and said in fluent Spanish, "Nice to meet you, Don Juan. My name is Zeke Murray." Chapter 48. Even with a knife held to his second-in-command's neck, Don Juan didn't flinch. He leisurely took out a new cigar, put it in his mouth, and lit it. After exhaling a thick puff of smoke, Don Juan greeted Zeke. "Nice to meet you, Zeke Murray." He took a deep breath and said, "It's my birthday today. You've brought a weapon instead of a gift?" Although his voice was calm, it carried a sharp edge. Zeke pressed the knife closer to El Mencho's neck and said, "I brought a gift right here." Don Juan's eyebrows twitched. "Are you saying my beloved brother, Joaquin, is a traitor?" Zeke grabbed El Mencho's hair and shook him. "Hey, El Mencho, why don't you tell him yourself?" El Mencho, held by the neck by Zeke, couldn't move or speak properly due to the pressure. He felt like the blade would slit his throat if he moved even slightly. "Damn it, what the hell is going on?" El Mencho kept signaling to the hitmen across from him. "Use magic, use aura, use assassination techniques, anything to kill this damn intruder," but the armed hitmen couldn't move recklessly. Zeke had completely subdued El Mencho, positioned himself behind him to minimize the attack range, and created blind spots to allow for counterattacks from any direction. If they attacked from a distance, he would surely use El Mencho as a shield. "That bastard, he's definitely a pro. Who the hell sent him?" Even in this tense standoff, Zeke remained calm and conveyed his message without a tremor in his voice. "If he won't speak for himself, I'll show you the evidence." At Zeke's nod, Kay placed the prepared documents in front of Don Juan. Don Juan slowly reached out and looked through the documents Kay had presented. His eyebrows twitched. Then he slowly opened his mouth. "The favela cartel guys are South Sea pirates?" The bosses of the McCain cartel stirred at his words. No one in the South liked the South Sea pirates. This was because they had been fighting against the pirates and protecting their families since their ancestors. In Don Juan's case, he had lost his family to pirates, so he held a particularly deep grudge against them. The fact that the McCain cartel, led by him, had pursued the favela cartel to the end and completely destroyed them stemmed from this background. El Mencho's expression changed. When the topic of the favela cartel being pirates came up, this was because he already knew the true identity of the favela cartel. His complexion subtly changed every time Don Juan turned a page of the documents, and the expressions of the other bosses in the room also shifted from moment to moment. After reviewing all the documents, Don Juan raised his head. "Zeke Murray, I've seen all the documents you've provided, but if you thought this would be enough to make me doubt my brother, Joaquin, you're gravely mistaken." Zeke nodded. "Of course you would think so. The boss is astute and suspicious." Don Juan felt a strange sensation at Zeke's words. It was as if the other person knew him very well. Just then, Zeke whispered something to El Mencho. El Mencho's face turned pale after hearing Zeke's words. "How do you know about that?" Zeke from the past life knew the secrets of all the cartel bosses. El Mencho had a young wife and daughter who were unknown to the public, and he loved them more than his own life. Zeke whispered that if he didn't tell the truth, he couldn't guarantee the safety of his wife and daughter. El Mencho trembled and opened his mouth. Please. Not that. Then why don't you reveal the truth? Then I swear to God that I won't touch them in the south. An oath to God was an absolute covenant. If one broke an oath made to God, they wouldn't be saved even after death. So even ruthless cartel members kept that oath. El Mencho trembled and raised his head. He looked at Don Juan and said, "B-boss, what Zeke Murray said is true." Don Juan's expression changed. "Joaquin, are you saying you betrayed me?" "Fish, that is. At first, I didn't know it was the favela cartel and made a deal with them." Don Juan jumped up from his seat, slammed his hand on the desk, and shouted, "You dare betray me?" El Mencho trembled and said, "I am sorry, boss. But I never intended to betray you. Gah!" Before El Mencho could finish his sentence, Don Juan grabbed an axe hanging on the wall and threw it at him. The axe accurately split El Mencho's head. The second in command of the McCain cartel died just like that. Don Juan approached the dead El Mencho and pulled out the axe. Embedded in his head, blood and brain matter splattered around, seemingly unconcerned. Don Juan returned to his seat and once again scanned the documents Kay had handed him. His hands stained with blood. Then he glared at the syndicate executives. "You were going to abandon the McCain cartel and switch to the favela cartel. That's why you burned all the soma in the warehouse." At Don Juan's words, one of the syndicate executives trembled and immediately fell to the floor, kneeling. "B-boss, that never happened. It's true. Please believe me." The executive turned to Kay and said, "That cunning mage bitch is playing tricks. That never happened, boss." But it was too late. Don Juan's axe split the executive's head open with a thud. The executive's head was also split open, and blood splattered everywhere. Kay was drenched in the executive's blood. She turned pale at the sight of such cruelty. Far beyond her imagination and frozen place, Don Juan, looking like a human butcher, picked up his axe and pointed it at the other bosses. "Who else betrayed me? Come out now. Come down, boss." Just then, Zeke approached Don Juan from behind, enraged. Don Juan swung the axe at Zeke. Zeke easily dodged Don Juan's axe. Don Juan, at best a purple knight, couldn't even touch a hair on Zeke's head. Don Juan, his eyes bloodshot at the sight of blood, breathed heavily. Then went to his seat, took out some soma powder, snorted it, and gulped down strong alcohol. Wiping his mouth, he said to Zeke, "Zeke Murray, who the hell are you? Are you an angel sent by God to help me? Or a devil who climbed up from hell to destroy this?" Don Juan. Zeke shook his head and said, "I am neither an angel nor a devil. I am a business partner who wants to propose a new deal to the boss." "Partner? What kind of deal do you want to make with me, Zeke Murray?" "The syndicate executives have betrayed you, boss, but the McCain cartel needs a distribution network to move its goods, Kay, and I will take over the role of the syndicate." Don Juan burst into laughter at those words. "Are you asking me to take care of that trash for a new deal with you? I'm saying you need a justification." Don Juan laughed again at those words. "Justification, you're right." Don Juan gestured to the hitmen behind him. The hitmen grabbed the awkwardly standing syndicate executives and dragged them out of the conference room. Don Juan sat back down. An underling brought him a towel, and after wiping the blood off his face and hands, he opened his mouth. "So let's say I entrust you with the distribution network. What's in it for me? I will help you take care of the favela cartel." Don Juan's expression changed at those words. "Are you saying you'll wipe those damn pirates off the face of the earth?" "I will erase them completely in the name of the boss and the McCain cartel." Don Juan suddenly jumped to his feet and burst into laughter. As Don Juan laughed, the other cartel bosses watching him also started laughing. Soon, Don Juan stopped laughing and looked at Zeke with a serious expression. "Amazing, Zeke Murray, truly amazing. All right. Then how do you plan to take care of the favela cartel?" Zeke spoke without hesitation. "If you give me an elite unit, boss, I will destroy one of the favela cartel's main camps and come back. We'll engrave the fear of the McCain cartel into them." Don Juan's eyes sharpened. It was as if he was trying to understand Zeke completely by dissecting him with his gaze. After a moment, Don Juan approached Zeke and placed his hand on his shoulder. "Zeke Murray, I, Don Juan, am moved by your courage and bravery today." He kissed Zeke's forehead. "There's no need for me to doubt you any further. You've already given me many gifts. To celebrate our partnership, I will bring you a new gift, boss." Don Juan nodded. "Very good." He slowly walked towards Kay. He took her hand, kissed it again, and said, "While you are displaying your bravery against the favela cartel, I will treat this lady as my honored guest." His words were gentle, but it meant that he would be holding Kay hostage. Unlike Kay, who was flustered, Zeke nodded calmly. Understood, boss. Don Juan smiled and raised his glass to McCain. And to the brave warrior, Zeke Murray. Salute! Salute! Along with Don Juan, the other cartel bosses also emptied their glasses. The air was thick with the smell of blood, sinister plots, and damp fear. Zeke finally felt that he had returned to the south. He looked at Don Juan, who was laughing heartily. Laugh while you can. Soon, you'll be trapped in the trap you set for yourself and struggle to get free. Whoosh! Shadows moved swiftly through the dense jungle. The McCain cartel's combat unit was currently deep within the favela cartel's territory in the jungle. Manuel, the unit leader, couldn't help but be surprised as he watched Zeke running ahead of him. He's clearly from the central continent, but how is he so proficient in southern martial arts? The southern continent didn't have a systematic aura training method like the central continent. Therefore, physical and weapon techniques were relatively more developed. However, Zeke was moving much faster and more stealthily than even their killers. Because of this, Manuel and the other unit members who had openly ignored and bullied Zeke at first gradually had no choice but to follow his commands as they went deeper into the favela cartel's territory. Just then, Zeke signaled to stop. The unit members all hid behind trees and carefully observed the area ahead. Soon, a group of figures appeared from beyond the trees. Manuel held his breath. Damn it, of all things, they're werewolves. Among the beastmen, werewolves were known for their high combat abilities. They were bipedal, so they could use human weapons, and in close combat, they attacked relentlessly with their sharp teeth and claws, making them difficult opponents. Manuel glanced at Zeke beside him. Despite being the unit leader, he realized that he was waiting for Zeke's orders, but Zeke didn't give any further orders. Instead, he took out a dagger from his pocket and slowly stood up before Manuel could stop him. Zeke swiftly climbed up a tree. Whoosh! Using mana to generate wind, Zeke leaped from tree to tree as if flying. Zeke felt a strange excitement at the prospect of his first proper battle in a long time. Completely concealing his presence from atop the tree, Zeke observed the werewolves below. He instinctively identified the strongest one among them. Whoosh! With a gust of wind, Zeke dropped straight down from the tree. Swish! Imbuing his dagger with a wind blade, Zeke sliced the werewolf leader in half. Crack! As the leader fell, split in two, the other werewolf warriors were startled and looked around, but it was already too late. Whirl! Zeke, clinging to the ground and moving like a snake, instantly cut down the remaining werewolves. Gah! As soon as he reached the center of the group, he targeted their necks and hearts, swiftly taking out 8 werewolf warriors. And no way. Manuel and the other unit members were also stunned by Zeke's movements. Zeke stood up casually, dusted himself off, and gestured to the unit members. Manuel and the unit members moved much more quickly than before. Chapter 49. Zeke and Manuel's unit approached the main production camp of the favela cartel. Seeing smoke rising beyond the jungle, Zeke realized they were close and told Manuel, "Wait here." Manuel was surprised. Huh? Wait here? What do you mean? Having witnessed Zeke single-handedly annihilate the werewolf unit, Manuel had become noticeably more respectful. Zeke stood up and said, "I'll go in alone." Then he added, "Your only job is to accurately report what happened up there." With those words, Zeke swiftly disappeared into the jungle alone. Manuel stood there dumbfounded, as did the other unit members. A short while later, a tremendous explosion erupted from within the camp. Startled, Manuel looked back at his unit. "What was that?" What should we do, Lieutenant?" Manuel pondered for a moment, then gestured to his unit. "Damn it, let's head towards the outskirts. We need to see what happened to at least make a report." Leaving Manuel's unit behind, Zeke approached the camp, freely utilizing his phantom steps to swiftly advance. Hiding my strength has been suffocating. Due to his concealed identity, he couldn't fully utilize his abilities. He planned to dismantle the camp using southern martial arts, assassination techniques, and elemental sword while sealing away his dragon slayer techniques. This should be more than enough for a cartel camp. Before his return, he often had to raid camps with his bare hands without relying on these skills. Back then, every raid was a gamble with his life. It was no exaggeration when Kaiser said Zeke had walked on the edge of death. Zeke reached the thick palisade of the camp. He pulled out an ordinary claymore from his inventory and channeled his mana to draw out the power of fire. Whoosh! The sword was engulfed in flames. Zeke immediately swung the fiery blade towards the palisade. Boom! The power was greater than expected, causing not only the palisade but also the surrounding structures to collapse. I need to control my strength a bit. Blindly destroying everything was easy, but he had a purpose here, so he needed to be careful. Attack! Attack! There's a mage. Watch out for magic. It seemed they mistook Zeke's flame sword for magic. Taking advantage of the chaos, Zeke infiltrated the camp and moved towards the central area guarded by favela cartel members. There, he found the factory facility where soma leaves were refined into powder. Before reaching it, however, he was blocked. Intruder. 15 cartel members rushed towards Zeke. He pulled out daggers from his inventory swish. Holding daggers in both hands, he threw them at the charging members. Thud. The members, hit precisely between their eyes, collapsed instantly. Zeke's inventory held hundreds of cheap daggers, so he didn't hesitate to throw them at the cartel members. Ugh! Soon, all the charging members lay dead with daggers embedded in their foreheads or hearts. Zeke immediately dashed towards the production facility. Clank! Clank! Something approached Zeke with a deafening roar. Surprisingly, it was a few tanks equipped with magic engines. They managed to acquire those expensive things that aren't even commonly used in the Central Continent. In the Central Continent, knights and high-ranking battle mages were preferred over magic weaponry. Magic weapons were not only expensive but also required significant maintenance. However, the cartel had an abundance of money and a scarcity of skilled knights and mages. It was no wonder they were the biggest customers of the Magic Tower and the Nirvana clan. Looking at the tanks, clad in iron armor and charging towards him, Zeke drew out Bahamut. In his previous life, Zeke would have had to avoid tanks at all costs, but now the situation was different. His sword was enveloped by the power of wind, a technique often used by his master, the King Kaiser, unfolded from Zeke's sword. Elemental sword. Wind. Chapter. Storm sword. A sword imbued with the will of the raging wind was swung towards the tanks. Whoosh! A massive storm erupted around Zeke. Crash! The tanks, with their momentum to crush everything, were swept up by the storm and flipped over. Clank! Not only were they flipped over, but the outer armor was also ripped apart, unable to withstand the force of the storm. Ag! Help me! The cartel members operating the tanks crawled out from within, trembling in fear. The storm Zeke created formed a whirlwind, engulfing not only the tanks but also the surrounding production facilities, pulling them up into the sky. Wow, that's insane. Zeke was amazed by his own handiwork. He hadn't realized its true power while just training, but witnessing it firsthand was overwhelming. In an instant, the camp's production facility was devastated. The cartel members caught in the storm trembled, screaming in terror. Ah! A demon has appeared. Zeke beheaded the screaming cartel member and checked his minimap to confirm his location. Let's see. Where was the secret passage in this camp again? This camp was also one of the places Zeke had raided and destroyed in his previous life. Back then, he had captured one of the favela cartel bosses here and obtained various pieces of information. The fact that the favela cartel was originally a group of pirates was also information he learned from that guy. Examining the map, Zeke recalled the location of the secret passage. Right, it was that cave over there. Zeke quickly ran towards the cave located at the back of the camp. As he approached the cave, several cartel members aimed their crossbows at him. But Zeke's sword was faster. Before the crossbows could be fired, the cartel members' heads fell to the ground. You should have shot as soon as you aimed. Your training is terrible. Zeke collected the crossbows from the fallen members and entered the cave inside. More cartel members were guarding. Intruder! Ack! The first member he encountered collapsed before he could finish his sentence, struck by a bolt shot by Zeke, aimed precisely at the lungs. The member would die in agony without being able to scream. Zeke showed mercy by swiftly cutting off his head, granting him a quick death. Zeke continued through the cave, killing all the favela cartel members he encountered, and found the secret passage. He descended down the passage. It was a tunnel connected to an old mine. With his Dragon Eye skill activated, Zeke scanned the tunnel's surroundings. Was it like this back then? The walls and floor were well preserved for a simple mine tunnel. In his past life, he must have missed this detail as he was focused on completing his mission. Checking the map to locate the escaping cartel boss, Zeke leisurely entered the tunnel. The more I look, the less it seems like a mine. It's more like an ancient ruin. At that moment, something flew towards Zeke. Whoosh! Zeke snatched the arrow flying towards his forehead, but that wasn't the end. Suddenly, sharp needles sprang out from the arrow shaft, pricking his palm. Black mamba venom detected. The effect of the Constitution poison immunity negates the poison's effect. Black mamba venom was a deadly poison with no antidote. It was an assassination technique used to deal with knights in the central continent, a method of concealing a deadly poison within an arrow, anticipating that the target would try to catch it. Knights who could use aura often chose to catch arrows with their bare hands instead of dodging them as a way of showing off their skills. This arrogant attitude was exploited in the southern assassination technique, using poison to kill them. Zeke himself had used this method many times in his previous life. As Zeke caught the arrow and tossed it aside, someone appeared. What? I thought it was a knight, but it's just a brat. I wasted expensive poison. If Zeke hadn't neutralized the black mamba venom, he would have bled from every orifice and died within 5 minutes. A man with thick hair all over his body slowly approached Zeke. Who sent you guys? Zeke looked at the man and replied, Paulo Santos. Paulo was startled when Zeke said his name, and he backed away cautiously. You, how do you know my name? And why aren't you dead? Zeke slowly walked towards Paulo, sensing something amiss. Paulo immediately turned to escape. However, it was impossible to move faster than Zeke, who had mastered Gale Force. Whoosh. Zeke dashed past Paulo. He then drew a dagger and plunged it into Paulo's thigh. Ag. Paulo screamed, clutching his wounded thigh. Zeke tripped him, and as Paulo rolled on the ground, he said, Paulo, I have a few questions for you. Paulo spat at Zeke. Zeke easily dodged the spit and then stepped on the dagger embedded in Paulo's thigh. Ag. As the dagger blade dug deeper into his thigh, Paulo screamed and thrashed. Zeke pulled out another dagger and plunged it into his shoulder. Ugh. Looking at Paulo trembling in pain and fear, Zeke spoke again. Paulo, I know you're an executive of the Favela Cartel, and I also know that the Favela Cartel is a group of South Sea pirates. Paulo's eyes widened in surprise at Zeke's words. What do you mean? Don't act surprised, you wouldn't make a living as an actor. Paulo was even more terrified than before. Zeke took out a new dagger and held it to Paulo's throat. Listen to me, if you want to live, come with me to McCain and tell the boss everything about the Favela Cartel, then I'll let you live. Paulo was shocked by Zeke's words. McCain? You mean Don Juan sent you? Zeke pressed the dagger closer to his throat. Watch your mouth, don't carelessly call my boss's name. We never touched the McCain cartel. We respected each other's territories. Then why are you guys sniffing around the syndicate, trying to interfere with their distribution network? That's. Paulo couldn't help but be flustered as Zeke casually mentioned things that only executives in the Favela Cartel knew. Zeke pressed Paulo further. The boss has no intention of keeping you guys alive. He's going to launch a full-scale attack until Favela is completely reduced to ashes, wiping out the filthy pirates, understand? Paulo's eyes darted around. Then, as if he had something attached under his shoe, he quickly retrieved a hidden weapon and sprayed it at Zeke. Ugh. It was poison powder, and Zeke, hit directly, collapsed sideways. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Paulo limped away. Zeke, hit by the poison powder, clutched his face and rolled on the ground. Ag. He groaned and rolled around until Paulo disappeared down the passage, and only when Paulo was completely out of sight did he get up. This should be enough. That idiot, he must have forgotten that he didn't get hit by the black mamba venom earlier. The reason he sought out Paulo was to give him information about the McCain cartel. For both the McCain cartel and the Favela cartel to collapse simultaneously, a fierce war had to break out between them. That was what Zeke was aiming for. If Don Juan thinks they're going to launch a full-scale attack, Favela won't just sit still. While McCain and Favela were engaged in a fierce war, Zeke intended to slip through the cracks. Zeke brushed off the poison powder and turned around. Now, let's finish this. At that moment, he felt a chilling presence behind him. Whoosh. Something flew towards Zeke. Whirl. He hurriedly rolled to the side to dodge the attack, an aura-infused sword strike. It was a Central Continent swordsmanship style, not a southern one. He looked back. Several figures clad in black, wielding swords, had somehow appeared and surrounded Zeke from both front and back. Gritting his teeth, Zeke drew his sword. They were the ones he knew all too well. Come on, you damn Imperial hounds. Chapter 50. Wong. A clear sword cry resonated from the sword held by the hound. It meant he was at least a yellow knight. In fact, in a head-on confrontation, a southern hitman could never defeat a knight from the Central Continent. There was a difference in the way they trained from the very beginning. However, Zeke was no ordinary southern hitman. He imbued his dagger with the power of wind and threw it at the hound in the front. Clang. The hound deflected Zeke's dagger with his aura-infused sword and shouted to the others, he has an artifact. His dagger is imbued with magical power, be careful. It seemed they mistook elemental power for magic. Zeke pulled out more daggers and held them in both hands. Then he swiftly dashed forward. Whoosh. Like a southern hitman, Zeke moved nimbly, aiming for the knight's vital points and openings. Thud. However, the hounds were wearing hard armor under their clothes. Zeke realized that cheap daggers were not enough to deal with them. In this case, I'll just have to kill them all. Zeke quickly made up his mind, discarded the daggers, and drew Bahamut from his back. Wong. A powerful sword cry resonated from Bahamut. The hounds were caught off guard by the unexpected situation. That guy is not a southerner, he's a knight. Zeke changed his target, aiming for the one who had been communicating with the other hounds. He infused his sword with the power of wind. Whoosh. The hound trusted the strength of his armor. It was armor that could deflect ordinary sword strikes. However, that was a grave mistake. Slash. Zeke's sword cut not only through the armor but also through the hound's waist. Thud. Seeing their comrade's bisected body, the other hounds tensed up and became wary. Some of them tried to retreat, but they soon sensed something strange. Crack. An invisible barrier blocked the passage. When he drew Bahamut, Zeke had already torn a scroll to create a magical barrier. Zeke grinned at the hounds. I guess I can test the results of my training. Wong. Bahamut's vibration intensified and an aura blade surged forth. The hounds were stunned to see Zeke's aura blade, be Blue Knight. Zeke held his sword and assumed the starting stance of the Dragon Slayer technique. Dragon slaying art, true dragon sword art. Sky cleave. The sword form itself was a basic Dragon Slayer technique, but it contained the profound principles of the true dragon sword art. Zeke's sword moved in a large arc. Crash. The energy of the aura blade Zeke created extended in all directions. The hounds who came into contact with the energy tried to resist with their swords, but it was futile. Ag. The aura blade cut through their swords, armor, and bodies. Thud. In an instant, a dozen knights were reduced to pieces. Scattered everywhere, those outside the range of the aura blade collapsed on the ground, barely alive, gasping for breath. Zeke checked each of them with Bahamut and finished them off. Finally, he approached the last one alive and asked, "Why did the Imperial hounds come here?" The hound remained silent. Zeke clicked his tongue and spoke again. "You must have come here to find ancient artifacts on the Emperor's orders." Seeing the hound's surprised expression, there was no need to ask further. Zeke swung Bahamut and sent the last one's head flying. He then summoned the power of fire towards the scattered corpses. Whoosh. The pure power of fire incinerated the hound's remains. This should leave traces suggesting an attack by a Blue Knight and a mage. Hoping that the Favela cartel would see the traces and launch a stronger counterattack against the McCain cartel, Zeke left evidence to make it seem like a large number of knights and mages were involved. After cleaning up the scene, Zeke examined the inside of the tunnel. I didn't know in my previous life that the Imperial hounds were with the Favela cartel. Zeke was 16 years old when he arrived at this camp, whereas in his previous life, he was over 18, resulting in a time difference of about 3 years. Therefore, it was possible that the hounds had already found what they were looking for and withdrawn by the time he arrived here in his past life. Zeke decided to investigate what the hounds were searching for, turning on his map to find the location connected to the tunnel. He quickly headed towards it using phantom steps. It seemed to be an underground ruin. After running for a while, a familiar dungeon landscape appeared. There was a dungeon in the south too. Usually, ordinary people who didn't know much thought that dungeons only existed in the giant mountains, but in reality they were scattered throughout the continent. Zeke freely scanned the dark dungeon with his dragon eye skill, searching for traces of the hounds. Although the dungeon paths were intricately intertwined like a maze, it wasn't a problem for Zeke with his map. Just then, he sensed something ahead. Zeke concealed his presence and focused on his hearing. Did we lose contact with Patrol Unit 3? It seemed the ones Zeke had eliminated were Patrol Unit 3. Starting with that, the other hounds began to move busily. They spread out in all directions to search for the missing Unit 3, leaving the camp they had set up in the dungeon empty. Good. I'll take this opportunity to find information. Concealing his presence, Zeke infiltrated the camp. It was much larger than the camp he had seen in the barbarian territory. Zeke examined the map of the southern continent attached to the wall of the Situation Room. In addition to the location of the Favela camp, there were codes indicating deployments in various parts of the jungle. It seemed that this was the headquarters that oversaw the hounds searching for ancient ruins in the southern continent. Zeke shook his head after confirming that the Empire had extended its reach to the southern continent. What the hell is that crazy emperor trying to find by doing all this? He doesn't actually believe in immortality, does he? Zeke memorized the locations where the hounds were deployed, recording the locations on the map. To his surprise, the system automatically recorded the locations on his map. This is really convenient. Having secured the map, Zeke collected important documents from the Situation Room and stored them in his inventory. After taking everything he needed, he drew his sword. Shall I leave some traces here too? Flames erupted from Zeke's sword. Whoosh. The Situation Room as well as the entire camp caught fire and burned fiercely as the flames spread rapidly. The remaining hounds inside were startled and rushed out. Fire. Zeke immediately dashed out and stabbed the bewildered hounds with his sword to make it seem like there were multiple knights involved. He left different kinds of wounds on each of them. Confused by the flames, the hounds fell victim to Zeke's sword one after another. After dealing with all the remaining hounds, Zeke tried to escape the camp, but then he felt a strange presence behind him. What's this? There was nothing marked on the map. Yet, he felt an incredibly distinct human presence behind him. Slowly, he turned his head. Thud. A young knight with red hair, wearing the Imperial Grand Magic Armor Hersian instead of the regular hound attire, was staring at Zeke. Zeke immediately raised Bahamut. Hersian? Why is an Imperial Red Knight here? A full plate armor that covered the entire body without any gaps. Not only was it engraved with all sorts of auxiliary magic, but it also had lightweight magic and automatic recovery magic cast on it, making it a treasure among treasures that repaired itself even if damaged. It was so expensive to make that there were no more than 100 owners throughout the entire empire. Therefore, Zeke was puzzled as he looked at the Imperial Knight approaching him. Who is it? If it was a knight with Hersian, he should at least know their appearance and name. However, the young knight approaching him was completely unknown in his previous life. Moreover, the Hersian he was wearing seemed different from the standard Imperial ones. The Imperial Knight stopped in front of Zeke and spoke. I thought several units of mages and knights had come, but it was just one person causing all this commotion. Judging by his accent, he was indeed an Imperial noble, holding Bahamut. Zeke asked, Who are you? The Imperial Knight drew his sword and replied, You seem young, but a knight as skilled as you deserves to hear my name. Raising his sword, he declared, My name is Cain. In an instant, Cain charged forward with his sword raised. Crash. Whoosh. A heavy charge attack, combining the weight of the full plate armor and the power of aura, struck Zeke. Bang. Pushed back by the force, Zeke retreated, seeing that it was much stronger than he expected. It seemed that the armor not only amplified his strength, but also enhanced his aura. Cain looked surprised as Zeke blocked his attack. You blocked my attack, truly amazing. He had an expression as if he had found an interesting toy. Seeing that, Zeke straightened his posture. Then, he raised Bahamut and unleashed his aura. A clear aura blade surged forth. Cain smiled as he looked at Zeke. To encounter a true knight like you in this remote place, I couldn't be more delighted. Without a word, Zeke dashed towards Cain. Utilizing the phantom step, swish, Zeke's sword powerfully thrust towards Cain's vital points. However, blocked by the Hersian. The sword was deflected. Cain grinned at Zeke. The Hersian I possess is special. It even blocks aura blades. Looking at the confident Cain, Zeke gripped his sword again. Then, regulating his breathing, he used the skill Mana Reflection. Crackle. The Mana Reflection skill unfolded around Zeke's body. Fizzle. Fortunately, Cain's Hersian was also affected by Mana Reflection. As small sparks flew from its surface, his expression changed. You. What have you done? Zeke's skills didn't end there. He used the Discord skill stored in his quick slot. Screech. An irritating, strange sound resonated. Cain frowned. Now I see you're just a guy who relies on cheap tricks. Instead of replying, Zeke charged towards Cain and used the flashbang skill. Flash. An intense light exploded right in front of Cain. Ugh! Cain couldn't open his eyes properly due to the flashbang. Zeke swung his sword at him. Bang! Even in that situation, Cain swung his sword and blocked Zeke's attack. Then, with his eyes still closed, he swung his sword at Zeke again. Bang! Surprisingly, Zeke deflected Cain's sword with his bare hands. He had strengthened his body with the dragon scale armor. A draconian skill. Zeke immediately closed in on Cain. Then, using the pancration technique he learned during his time in the cradle, he tried to grab Cain's leg. At that moment, a dark, ominous energy erupted from Cain's body. A blade-like force shot out, spreading in all directions like a porcupine's quills. Patching. Zeke instinctively rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding it, and created some distance from Cain. Cain, with his eyes sunken and cold, stared at Zeke before speaking. You've got quite a few interesting tricks up your sleeve. Zeke, his gaze now even more serious, adjusted his sword and aimed it at Cain. A warrior of this caliber has no alias? That could only mean one thing, a secret weapon of the Empire. One of the reasons the Rom Empire hadn't gone to full-scale war with Draker was due to the difference in the number of Black Knights they each possessed. Draker, as a single clan, had 5 Black Knights. If you included allied families or nations, they could potentially summon up to 10 Black Knights. However, officially, the Rom Empire only had 3 Black Knights, even though Draco's numbers were overwhelmingly larger if the Black Knights, often referred to as one-man legions, were deployed. Even the largest number of regular knights would be useless. If a young knight from the Empire had this kind of skill but no known alias, it was highly likely he was being secretly trained as a Black Knight, a weapon hidden away by the Empire. Zeke decided to test Cain. The Rom Empire is ridiculous. They treat a secret weapon like you as a hound and send you off to dig up ancient relics. At Zeke's words, Cain smiled and shook his head. You're good at provoking, I'll give you that. Taking a step towards Zeke, Cain spoke again. The sparks crackling around Hercian had subsided, indicating that the effect of mana reflection had ended. Slowly opening his eyes, he said, "A knight like you is fully qualified to know my name." Holding his sword with a formal stance, Cain declared, "My name is Cain Siemens Constantine." Zeke was astonished. What? An unexpected name had emerged.